Hi everyone, I'm doing a live video. We're interviewing Dr. SK Kaur. If you guys want to join in, it is on our Facebook page. Okay, I think we're live. Hang on a minute, guys. Just give me 1 second. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to CERAH's first ever webinar series, Let's Clear the Air. Happy World Environment Day for Friday, everyone. Hopefully you guys did something really fun. For those of you not familiar with the Malay language, CERAH means bright. A bit about us. We were formed in 2015 at the back of a really bad haze season affecting Malaysia, and as you would know now, 2009 was the worst haze season on record. We are a bunch of civilians who gathered together, and we want to be the voice of reason to stop seasonal haze in this region. Our members influence policy, at the legislation and the government level. We create awareness and education. We provide informed decision making opinions and expertise for strategic initiatives and business improvements. And we join forces with other anti-haze crusaders in the region to maximize efficiency and boost traction for action. So today's webinar has been brought to you, just a quick shout out, with the support of our friends at KAMY. KAMY stands for Climate Action Malaysia, which is Climate Action Malaysia, and they are fighting for climate justice, demanding climate emergency to be declared in Malaysia. So my name is Naja, and I'm an environmental engineer from Australia. I have been a member of CERAH for about a couple of years now. The way that this webinar will be run is that I will open up questions to our guest speaker, and then I will take some questions from the audience as we go along. So please, if you're joining us today, please put your questions in the comment section of this Facebook live stream, and then at any time, and then we can take them as we go along. Today, I'm very excited to let you know that we will be focusing our discussion on Haze's impact on public health. What can we anticipate for the upcoming Haze season, and how a pandemic might just give us some clues and lessons learned on how to deal with this crisis moving forward. Now, of course, as you are familiar with the Haze issue, there are so many dimensions to tackling the long-term solutions. So if your questions do not relate to today's topic, we promise we will do our best to gather these for future discussions. Now, with us here today is Dr. Kaur Swee Kang, a physician and global health expert. We're very lucky to have him. He has worked as a refugee doctor in healthcare, anti-corruption across the globe, and most importantly, in public health. Along with a group of health professionals, he proposed a symbolic lawsuit of 1 ringgit, yes, 1 Malaysian ringgit, to the Indonesian government in September 2009 at the height of the most recent Haze season. I'm so excited to be speaking with him. He joins us from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Dr. Kaur, welcome.
Thank you, Naja. It's a pleasure to be here, and happy World Environment Day to you and everyone too.
Yes. How is KL at the moment? Is it pretty warm?
KL's warm as always, and one good thing, Naja, about the pandemic, there are very few good things about the pandemic. I apologize for that. But what I mean is that as we have had the MCO, the Movement Control Order in Malaysia, and we've seen, shall we say, a shift towards online work with fewer people going to work and more people, shall we say, staying at home, and the economic footprint has reduced. Air pollution has also gotten better in Malaysia. So that could be one small silver lining as a result of the pandemic these days, Naja.
Absolutely. I think we are all very blessed in a way that the environment's health is coming back together. But as we know, we are going to tackle this topic head on as we get into the next hour. So I'll start with my questioning, if that's okay.
Of course, Naja.
I will put, thank you. Dr. Kaur, we haven't met for a long time, but we've worked together for a bit. So I will actually address you as SK to keep this conversation a little bit informal as we go along. SK, so you are the founding member of the Malaysian Health Coalition, of which CERAH is a supporting signatory. Let's start by exploring how Haze is a public health issue.
Thank you, Naja. Naja, for a start, maybe I'll talk a little bit about the Malaysian Health Coalition. We're about 3 months old right now. We started in March this year. And currently we have about 47, 48 professional medical and health societies under the banner of the coalition. So it's not just doctors and specialists, but also nurses and pharmacists and dentists and public health physicians, and those who are in environmental action as well. The reason why the Malaysian Health Coalition is very broad is because health is an issue that concerns everyone and cannot only be left to clinics and hospitals and doctors and specialists and nurses. Therefore, we wanted the coalition to be as broad as possible to have as many stakeholders as possible, given the intersections between health and so many other areas. In this case, Naja, to your question, Haze is a public health issue. It is a health issue as well. Why is Haze a public health issue? Because it concerns large numbers of the population. For example, if you have diabetes, and lots of Malaysians have diabetes, that only concerns perhaps 20 to 40% of the population, depending on how there are different categories and the grades of diabetes, and up to 20 to 40% of Malaysians have that problem. But Haze, whenever we have the annual Haze in Southeast Asia, all 32 million Malaysians will be affected. Perhaps all 220, 250 million Indonesians will be affected, 5 million Singaporeans, 400,000 Bruneians, and so on and so forth. Then the Haze issue becomes a really public issue when no one is spared. And because no one is spared, Nadja, it becomes a very, shall we say, a very serious and very important issue worthy of many, many people trying to talk about solutions. So therefore, if I expand it even more, I would say not only doctors and nurses and medical professionals, but also climate change activists. We also need economists, because ultimately there are private sector companies that are involved, and we also need foreign affairs and diplomats and people to interact with the Indonesian government and the ASEAN Secretariat and so on and so forth. What I mean to say is Haze is a really large and transcendent issue. And because it's so large, we will need a large coalition of people, an unlikely coalition, shall we say, to come together to fight it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that insightful response. So you have been practicing as a public health professional, and you are a doctor, let's be honest. And what made you so passionate about this particular issue, SK? Give us a little bit. This is your platform to talk about a little bit about your work.
Sorry, Nadja, just to clarify, why am I so passionate about the haze and air pollution, or just about public health?
Yes, of course. And public health, yes.
Okay. Well, maybe I will go small and then go big. From small, we'll go big, yeah? So from haze to air pollution to public health in general. We'll start off with the haze.
Right.
The haze is so predictable. Every year in August to September to October, around this few months, it comes, and we're almost powerless to fight it. And that predictability, that sense of shall we say loss of control or loss of power, is something that I think is important for society to think about too. I don't want this to be a train wreck. I don't want this to be an oncoming heavy truck, right? That we can't swerve to avoid. And this is something that shall we say perhaps even upsets me a little bit, because it's so predictable, and yet every year we have the same problem. Haze has a clear public health implication, which I've already addressed, but let me broaden up the conversation to air pollution. Air pollution has multiple sources. Haze is one of them, but we also talk about air pollution. For example, in a country like India and in large parts of Africa, they don't use gas or electricity to cook. What they do is they'll collect firewood, or in some cases use cow dung for it to as a source of fuel, and they cook indoors. And when they cook indoors, all the smoke and all the particulate matter they breathe in, and this only to cook food for your family. A lot of excess mortality, that technical term means, people who die more than what is expected or more than what is the average. A lot of excess mortality is caused by air pollution inside the house, where, for example, they use firewood or charcoal or animal dung in order to cook food. And this is something that is a huge public health problem. They will come to hospitals, and you can never have enough hospitals and clinics and doctors and nurses and nebulizers for you to save all the billions of people who suffer from air pollution. And that's the second example, cooking. The third example will be air pollution from factories, from cars and public transportation and so on. And these are three big examples of air pollution that causes a lot of people to have a lot of problems breathing. Then they go to hospitals. So these are just three examples of air pollution. So then why public health? Because we can never build as many hospitals to treat 7.7 billion people with air pollution problems or problems breathing because of air pollution. For example, in Malaysia, right, we have 145 public hospitals. Even if you double it, right, to 290, 300, 500 hospitals, we will never have enough doctors and hospitals to treat everyone. So then, instead of building more hospitals, maybe we go one step back. How can we address air pollution? And if you can reduce air pollution, then you don't need so many hospitals and don't need so many doctors. Certainly, fewer people will suffer or die. And if you zoom back down a little bit, if we can have a long-term solution to the annual and very predictable haze problem, then you have less air pollution, you have a less need for hospitals and doctors and nurses as well. It sounds great in theory, but it's very difficult to do in practice. So why public health? I would say it's an opportunity to save, shall we say, millions at a time, and stop people from suffering, stop deaths, and perhaps even stop building too many hospitals. So that, Nadja, is me trying to elaborate it from haze to air pollution and more broadly to the idea of public health, and that's why I'm passionate.
Thanks, SK. I think we're all in agreement with you there that haze is a predictable issue, and that lack of control to actually stop it from happening over and over every year is quite frustrating. And so I must say thank you so much for joining us today to kind of give a bit of perspective to our audience as to why haze is not just, forest fires and slash and burns and burning, and it's not smoke in the air. It actually is a health issue to yourself, to everyday citizens, but also a public health issue because it affects us no matter where we are. Wherever the smoke billows, it goes, and there you go. You can't really stop it. Once it's there, it's frustrating. I can tell you right now, last year was pretty bad. It was a pretty bad hay season. I really appreciate your time here today. I might want to go into a bit about Indonesia now, and I know this is slightly a bit contentious because they are our neighbors, but let's get straight into it because I think a lot of people will want to hear your perspective on this issue. Now, the Indonesian government, the Environment Ministry earlier this year has cut its budget for 2020 by about $101 million, a 17% reduction on spending originally planned for the year. Now, the world's fourth most populous country with more than 260 million people, as you mentioned before, has recorded more than 30,000 cases of virus infection so far. Now, with our resources already at a stretch to manage this COVID pandemic, not just in a neighboring Indonesia, but in Malaysia too, how do we anticipate our ASEAN counterparts to react to the upcoming fire burning season? Will we have enough resources on the ground to counter any mishaps swiftly and efficiently? Will our public health system be able to cope with treating respiratory disease, as you mentioned before, alongside our COVID patients? And how can this be managed in terms of the way our facilities are set up?
Najah, thank you very much. Maybe I'll begin by saying that Malaysia and Indonesia has a very special relationship. And firstly, we're in ASEAN. Secondly, we're neighbors. Thirdly, is Nusantara. Fourthly, I'm wearing a batik shirt that's inspired by an Indonesian motif. So there is a lot of closeness between Malaysia and Indonesia. We have to collaborate on any number of issues. The haze is one, COVID responses is a second, security, health security and physical security in the Southeast Asia region. Indonesia is a very important stakeholder, and it's important that Malaysia partners Indonesia in a way that's constructive as well as solutions oriented rather than problem oriented. I'll begin there. Najah, I'll answer your questions a little bit more narrowly, and then maybe we'll go up a little more broadly. It is not surprising to me that the Indonesian Environment Ministry cut their budget by $100 million, like you mentioned. I think a lot of countries around the world are reprioritizing their budgets and finances to fight COVID, to augment or to improve or strengthen their health systems. And therefore, as a result, a lot of other spending will have to be put on hold. So this is not a trend that's unique to Indonesia, but I think many countries or even all countries are reprioritizing the way they spend their money. Naturally, this will have a knock-on effect or a downstream effect or a domino effect to the resources that the Indonesian government will have when it comes to the annual burning season in Indonesia. And let me drop two statistics over here. In Indonesia, agriculture comprises 15% of the economy, so it is very large. 15% of the economy, but hiring 40% of the population. So we're talking about 50 million Indonesians who are dependent on agriculture for their livelihoods. The Indonesian government will be in a very difficult position, which is what my point is, that on one hand, they have to manage COVID. On the other hand, they have to manage livelihoods. They also have to care for the livelihoods of 50 million Indonesians. It will be difficult for them, which is why Malaysia should try to help Indonesia as much as possible to find long-term and durable solutions. So I'll begin there. I'll make two more points, if I may, Najah. The second point that I will make is the impact to Malaysia's health system and also Indonesia's health system if we let the haze season come again, and there will be tremendous impact. Tremendous in a few ways. The first way is when you have haze, you have trouble and difficulty breathing. On top of that, COVID is considered a respiratory illness that causes you to have trouble breathing. So imagine that you have a little social distancing because large crowds of people go back to work, therefore increasing their risk of COVID. You can't socially distance easily in a plantation. Secondly, there is the haze and the burning and the particulate matter and the pollution that worsens your lung function. And then thirdly, there's a triple hit of COVID. So naturally, the health system of Malaysia and Indonesia and Thailand and Singapore will be affected as a result of the haze. Will it be stressed? Yes. How can we cope? This will be tough. More doctors, maybe more specialized pathways for when you have an asthmatic attack or a respiratory attack, then you can come to more accelerated pathways inside a hospital. There are different ways that you can say adjust a hospital. But then again, to my earlier point, Nadja, we can only build so many hospitals. We should try to tackle the problem at the source instead of building the hospitals. So my second point is it will be stressed. The third and final point, Nadja, that I'll make is to say that the Indonesian government and the Indonesian civil society and the Indonesian Doctors Associations have an incentive to act. It's not just Malaysia reliant on Indonesia, and it's not helpful to blame anyone because I think this is everyone's problem to solve. But let me maybe change the conversation and say, what's in it for Indonesia to act? And the answer is for the health of their own citizens, to ensure that their health systems are not stressed as a result of the triple hit of economic problems and COVID, as well as the haze. And then thirdly, to increase the legitimacy of the Indonesian government, maybe even fourthly, using COVID as a way to pivot away the Indonesian economy faster from agriculture. In the last 10 to 20 years, the percentage of Indonesia's economy that's dependent on agriculture has dropped, but the number of people have generally increased because the population of Indonesia has increased. If Indonesia can use COVID in a way to rebalance their economy, less away from agriculture and to create employment opportunities for 50 million Indonesians, it will be an acceleration and it will help them as well improve greater health. Now, it sounds great, again, on theory. A lot of it depends on political will. I don't pretend it's easy, Nadja, but the pathways are reasonably clear. Maybe the conversation should shift to what can we do to get there, as opposed to where to get to. Nadja, those are my few thoughts.
Thank you, SK. Thank you so much. I know it's hard I feel like it's hard for us to talk about just centering the public health issue during this topic without actually getting into the fact that political will is a big key into actually getting haze being stopped in our region. I mean, let's be honest, I think we recorded our first haze in ASEAN in 1972. Isn't that how many decades ago? And so, you know, like a lot of us, a bunch of the ASEAN countries got together like 4 years ago now, 2016, and the leaders of these countries are saying that, you know what, you know, we've slapped Indonesia on the wrist a few times, and we're going to step up. We're going to restore some of our peatlands. We're going to have a transnational sort of haze agreement that everyone can adhere to. And we're going to be haze-free by 2020. And by the sounds of what you're telling me, we are still kind of, even though we've made some progress in terms of on-the-ground kind of efficiencies in terms of forest and peatland management and getting people to be compliant and getting people to actually, you know, burn a bit better and things like that, we are still at the base of it. Are tackling, dealing with this complicated sovereignty relationship, you know, that I think a few people are quite frustrated with. And it's not like we don't know, it's not like we don't know, it's happening, you know. But going back to the respiratory diseases and taking advantage of COVID as something that just happened, not just Indonesia, but everyone else. I think it is in Indonesia's, I agree with this, is Indonesia's main interest to actually use this particular platform to then look after their people better, but there's no excuse for other ASEAN nations. We also can look after our people better and set ourselves fairly well for this road ahead in terms of dealing with pandemic health issues, but also Haze health issues. I really appreciate your perspective on that. That's awesome. Thank you. It is very concerning, as you say, that people need to get back to work, and their main cari makan in Malay, cari makan, which is your main income, is going back to their plantations. 15% of Indonesia's workforce work in agriculture. So this is quite interesting to watch, and whether or not we can sort of digitize that economy, because we've kind of had a bit of an impetus to kind of become a bit more digital because of the pandemic. We'll yet to see the results of that. Again, very well, and get to discuss this in theory, but yeah, we'll have to see what they come back to us with. So going back to then the pandemic, I'll move on to some blessings. And we talked about blessings at the start of this particular conversation. As you said, there's a blessing in disguise for the pandemic. We have clearer skies, less pollution and stuff like that. But as everyday citizens now go back outside, and Indonesian citizens going back outside, Malaysian citizens going back outside, we are working in plantations. We are probably starting back our slash and burn sort of practices. What can we learn, and what can we apply for this in the context of future haze seasons? I think you've already answered some of the questions there, but it is particularly distressing. Do you want to add a little bit more on that?
I do, Nadja. Thank you. Nadja, let's talk about perhaps air pollution in more theoretical terms, and then we zoom into more specific examples from Malaysia. According to data from the World Health Organization, 9 out of 10 people breathe air that has very high levels of pollutants, and pollutants are of various sorts. It could be noxious gases, it could be fine particulate matter, it could be smoke, smog, and so on and so forth. But the data is staggering. 90% of human beings breathe air that is unhealthy. 90%, I mean, this is so staggering, I think it bears repeating. 90% of all human beings on Earth breathe air that is polluted. One of the world's greatest dangers, actually, when we talk about public health, is not so much about the number of hospitals that we have and how high-tech surgeries could be, and the amount of emergency rooms that we have, and great ambulance services that can whisk you from your home where you're suffering from an asthma attack straight to the hospital where you can receive a nebulizer. All those components are very important, and I'm quite engaged in those as well. But when you have 90% of the world breathing air that is polluted, you'll never have enough hospitals and doctors and technologies, right? Then the question becomes, what about the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, the food that we eat, and the kind of sleep and rest and exercise that we have? These are the determinants of health that are beyond just hospitals. So to summarize that again, not only hospitals, but air we breathe, water we drink, food we eat, and the kind of quality of sleep and movement, meaning exercise and so on, do we have, is crucial to determining the health status of another person, of anyone really. So my point being that air pollution is an important factor in any fight for health. Let's zoom in a little bit to Malaysia so we get less theoretical and a little bit more practical. In the last few months during the MCO, Malaysia, just like every other country, in very anecdotal terms, yeah, so there's no real science behind it, but people have been taking pictures of how clean the air is because factories have shut down. Rivers are cleaner as a result of factories shutting down and not working. Wild animals, in some cases, have returned to some small cities in Malaysia, also in large cities like a deer recently came into Barcelona in Spain. These are examples of how when human beings have, shall we say, stopped economic activity, shall we say, nature recovers. But the challenge is, Naja, it's not as simple as we shut down economic activity and then nature recovers and therefore it's a good. Because economic activity is also necessary to eradicate poverty, and therefore we need a balance. I'm not saying shut down all economic activity because we'll remain poor, just in favor of protecting the environment. There is a balance that we need to strike. What COVID is offering Malaysia and other countries is to look at the last few months and how, I guess, quality of life in some respects have improved. In some respects, it has deteriorated, right? So this is one of, shall we say, one of those things where things are good and bad at the same time. So if we focus a little bit on the good for now, is to say that this COVID pandemic is giving Malaysia an opportunity to see the kind of economy that we have. And is the purpose of the economy to make money and get richer? Or is the purpose of the economy to improve the human condition? And if it's to improve the human condition, it invites us to rethink how we want to grow. That's me, shall we say, giving the theoretical explanation of air pollution and how it intersects with public health. Also, zooming it down into Malaysia, can we move some parts of our economy, for example, to be less polluting and greener, and less polluting and perhaps more digital, for example? Naja, those are my thoughts about, shall we say, the haze, the air pollution aspects, and also how COVID has come into this in the last few months.
Thanks, SK. I love the fact that you're talking about the economy and how can we be less polluting in the future, because let's be honest, the holy grail of what everyone wants to achieve, obviously, again, on the ground, it's hard. It's hard for you know, Indonesia to kind of make that move, but I wonder if they are having those sorts of discussions, you know, back where they're sitting, you know, making those sorts of decisions, which is great. Thank you. We have one question that's come through, if you don't mind. It is tied up to a little bit of agriculture businesses in Indonesia, and a little bit of public health. But you know, since you're quite an expert, I'll throw it out to you. See, our friend Braham Ngu, sorry if I got that wrong, asked this question. So, removing the constraints of geopolitical boundaries, would you say this is a rural versus urban inequality? In terms of, you know, when you talk about moving from agriculture, from that sort of economy to a service, more digitized economy, how do we reconcile the justice piece? You know, urban folks, we want clean air, but also we want cheap food from cheap palm oil. And let me just clarify to our viewers, the burning and splashing practices for to prepare for new plantations in Indonesia, it's not necessarily just for palm oil plantations, but it's also for pulp and paper. Let's get that out of the way. So he's asking interesting dichotomy of justice there. Do you have any comments?
Naja, thank you. And Graham, I think, is the person who asked the question. So thank you for the question. It's a great question. And I'm afraid I will not be able to give sorry? Thank you, Naja. I'll go on. I will not be able to give a perfect answer because there will be no perfect answers. But here perhaps are some two sets of thoughts here. The first set of thoughts is about justice, equality, poverty. The second set of thoughts is about urban, rural. So we'll go to the first set. The single largest, shall we say, risk factor for poor health is actually poverty and inequality. More so than genetics, more so than air pollution, more so than, shall we say, water pollution, poor food safety. All those are very important. I'm not saying that they're not important. They're very, very important. If I had to rank order, and every rank order would be necessarily imperfect. If I had to rank order the threats to health, I would say poverty and inequality is the highest. It contributes a lot to people getting sick. It contributes a lot to people suffering from disease. It contributes to people dying. So disease, suffering, and death disproportionately contributed to by poverty and inequality. But poverty and inequality has many different dimensions. In theoretical terms, you can think about it as urban-rural. You can think about it as, shall we say, in race terms or ethnicity terms in any country. You can think about it in gender terms as well, because women, unfortunately, due to a patriarchal setup in various countries, have accessed more disease and death as a result of gender. I do not stand for that. We should all fight against that. The point I'm making is poverty and inequality, no matter how you stratify or rank it, no matter what sort of lenses you use to define poverty and inequality, it will cause the greatest amount of disease, suffering, and death. And therefore, we should fight poverty and inequality wherever it exists: race, gender, nationality, income classes, and so on. Those are my first set of comments, and I absolutely agree with you. The second set of comments is about the urban-rural divide. I'm not an Indonesia expert, I'm sorry for that. And I do not know too much about the urban-rural condition and, shall we say, the social discourse, the social contract, the kinds of narratives that between the urban people, the people in the urban settings in Indonesia, and also people in the rural settings in Indonesia. So I want to put that master caveat, I'm not an Indonesia expert. But you've touched on a great point when asking the question. It is the unreasonable expectations of any human being that we expect to have clean air, clean water, and then at the same time, cheap food that is secure and accessible. We can't have it all. This world is a world of trade-offs. Unfortunately, although we will try to work to an ideal world, even an ideal world in the journey towards it requires us to have trade-offs. And those trade-offs are very uncomfortable to converse and discourse about. So if there is some disconnect between the urban setting and the rural setting in Indonesia, you put in the economic incentives, you put in the capitalist structures of not only Indonesia, but the whole world, really. And these are all dynamics that are not easy to resolve. I can identify them. I can have a position or a thought about that from a Malaysian perspective, given I understand Malaysia a lot better than Indonesia. But I perhaps have shared a few thoughts about how these conversations will need to be had so that we manage our expectations and understand that there are trade-offs. We can't have it all. Everything will be imperfect, and we should just try to minimize the imperfections as much as possible. So those are my comments as it relates to the urban-rural divide in Indonesia, if I can use the word. But allow me to go back to my main point. Poverty and inequality, no matter how you define poverty and inequality, are the greatest threats to health.
Great. That's such a good answer. Thank you so much, SK. I really appreciate it. I think we've got 2 more questions just so that we can keep to time. There is thanks Braham for that question. And then after the couple of audience questions, then we'll probably just wrap up actually, just so that we keep to time. One of the things that someone did mention, and we have thought about this before, I mean, CERAH does a lot of work in terms of a holistic anti-haze action, problem solving, and that's the reason why one of them is a public health sort of angle, and that's why we are a signatory to your Malaysia Health Coalition. I think you guys do such great work. I'll comment about that a bit later at the end of this video. But one of the things that we did mention is that Malaysian and Singaporean banks do finance a lot of agri-based activity in Indonesia. Is there, are we contributing to the problem? And do Malaysians know about this? You know, do we look at our pension funds and buy stocks? And how do we make those decisions to kind of, perhaps in an individual sense, contribute to solving the fight, you know, this unsustainable sort of agri-business model that's happening at the moment?
Najat, that's a great question. I must admit, I do not know Malaysian banks or Singaporean banks that are directly providing financing or loans to companies engaged in agriculture in Indonesia, for example. But I will not be surprised if this is happening. Some parts of Indonesia's plantations are held by Malaysian companies, and it would not surprise me that Singaporean banks and Malaysian banks are loaning money to Malaysian companies. So I say this very neutrally. And let me expand the conversation to not only polluting companies, but also tobacco, for example. And let me take a stance against tobacco, firm stance against tobacco. there are also, shall we say, polluters like coal and dirty energy, however we define dirty energy. And it's an endless list of companies, for example, gambling companies and so on. And these are just several examples that benefit from money that ultimately comes from you and me. So let me take Bank X, whatever X is, yeah? So Bank X, you and I bank in Bank X, and Bank X provides a loan to Company Y, and Company Y invests in, shall we say, unethical businesses, for example, slash and burn, for example, tobacco, and so on. Yes, I'm making moral judgments about some of these end industries, and I think that we should divest appropriately. We can't divest overnight. It's not a overnight, we just snap our fingers and move trillions of dollars out of it. But I think we should have a clear strategy that we move money out of these industries over a gradual period of time. A bit of a hurry, if you ask me, 5 to 10 years appears reasonable for us to take our money away from these banks. This requires, Naja, two small things. The first one is for us as an individual consumers and all of you listening in to be mindful of where we bank. But then again, right, often we choose where we bank, Bank A or Bank B or Bank C, not because of the investing policies of these banks or the investing policies of a sovereign wealth fund, for example, in Singapore, for example, only a Temasek or Temasek in Singapore, or Khazanah in Malaysia, or a CPF in Singapore, a Central Provident Fund in Singapore, or Employees Provident Fund in Malaysia, or the California Public Employees Retirement Scheme, or CalPERS, which manages, if I recall correctly, maybe $1 trillion of assets under management, or the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund that has got, I don't know, maybe 1.5 trillion, $2 trillion of assets under management as well. And this requires us to be thoughtful about where we bank our money and what pension funds do we put our money in. But like I've already given those examples, Naja and everyone, often we don't have a choice. We can choose our banks, but we can't choose our pension funds. So let's set it aside. Then the public campaign for what we can do is to write letters, be thoughtful about where CalPERS, $1 trillion, Norway's sovereign wealth fund, where they put their money, Japan Post with another $1 trillion, where they put their money, where BlackRock, another $1 trillion. I'm giving approximate numbers. I don't recall what their assets under management are, but we're talking trillions of dollars. Where these companies put their money is crucial. I'll end with one specific example. I was informed by somebody recently, and we'll publish a series about this very soon, that in the last 10 years, the Asia Pacific region has divested, that is a technical financial term for it, divested 10 trillion, and I repeat, trillion with a T, $10 trillion outside and away from the tobacco industry. So that comes from a combination of public pressure, it comes from a combination of concern and citizens who are thinking about these things and writing letters to our sovereign wealth funds, our pension funds, and our banks to move money away from polluting industries towards industries that are greener, more ethical, more sustainable, and with better governance. And this requires us to be thoughtful about say when to write a letter, for example, to these pension funds and to divest this gradually, but also in a hurry. And I point to you the example of divesting $10 trillion away from tobacco industries in the last 10 years.
Thanks, SK. And we can talk about that on and on, can't we? And you're absolutely right. Like, you know, like in Melbourne here in Australia, where I am at the moment, because I'm stuck here, but that's another story. You know, we have, because of public pressure, we have had, you know, investment being divested away from polluting activities, for example, you know, but as an individual, I think it's fairly important for a lot of our audiences to understand they do have the power as one individual with their money, because money is where it hurts polluting companies most. And we can again talk about this for a long time, but that is absolutely an awesome perspective. Thank you, Daryl Weber, for that question. We have one more question, and then I'll probably go back to my last thoughts for us. This question comes from Sebastian Lara Hondo. I'm sorry if I got this wrong, Sebastian. Greetings from Colombia, South America. He's asking, how do we drive effective public health adaptation measures focused on vulnerability, it's interesting because we've talked about social justice before, and Haze is involved in social justice, climate justice, but also inequality. So, for example, he talks about vulnerability mapping and improved surveillance systems. He'd like to understand a bit of context about the Southeast Asian experience because they have similar issues relating to air quality and climate change adaptation and mitigation over there. Thanks, Sebastian.
Thank you, Naja. Hola, Sebastian. It must be very late, I think 10, 11 p.m. for you in Colombia. Gracias for your question. Sebastian asked a very difficult question that's very difficult to summarize in a few words. So I will have to give principles rather than an actual full-fledged solution. The first principle is to do the mapping, is to understand where the vulnerabilities are. And to do the mapping, it requires you to stratify what do you mean by vulnerability. And it means very different things to different people. You could be vulnerable, shall we say, in financial terms, you could be vulnerable in physical terms, etc., etc. So once you understand or you categorize how you define as vulnerability, and you map out the physical locations of vulnerability, that's a good step because you have information. Here I give one technical suggestion. Public health is increasingly integrated with something called GIS, or geospatial information systems, or geographic information systems, or geo-information systems. Yeah, whatever the term means, right? What they mean is you can use a sensing company that you can work with, and they'll give you data that allows you to map the individuals at the household level, or the neighborhood level, or the city level, or the village level of where the vulnerabilities are. And once you say, for example, partner with GIS companies and you build in that solution, you get a physical idea of where the vulnerabilities are, especially if you can stratify them. That's the first principle, get data. The second principle is to mobilize. And when I say mobilize, obviously there's a political component to it, there's an NGO advocacy component to it, and you must do this, shall we say, within the legal and the social constructs of your country. And every country is different. In Southeast Asia, it's very heterogeneous. We have 660 million people, 10 countries. It's difficult to find one common thread to say how NGOs act in terms of mobilizing the resources. But I might make one observation that I think is true for all Southeast Asian countries. NGOs are fragmented. Many NGOs work in their silos and they don't talk to each other. If we are conscious about building an unlikely coalition, a coalition of people, for example, in fighting haze, right? It's not just climate change activists. It should also be people who are in economics. It should also be people who are into geopolitics and foreign relations, also institutional reform of, shall we say, ESG, or environmental sustainability and governance metrics for how companies invest. So as you mobilize, consider building an alliance or a coalition that is broad. It will be difficult to build this coalition. Nobody doubts that. It's very, very challenging, but it's necessary, because if you go alone, you will not have a good, shall we say, backing and momentum. But if you go together, the voice is stronger. So I leave you these two broad principles and two specific suggestions inside those broad principles.
That is excellent. Thank you, SK. I appreciate that. So I think we have one more question, but I will take that one and comment on that one quickly, and then I'll ask you one last one before we end this session. Felicia Liu, hi Felicia. She has a question about, speaking from our respective sectors, public health and also environmental management, how do you think, she asks, how do you think the regularity, again, the predictability of the haze season has affected Malaysians, this is back to Malaysia, Malaysians' perception of the risks of haze and how they react to haze? And she asks if the regularity has increased our resilience, and if there is any individual action that we can do or take upon to increase our resilience. Now, I might take this question quickly because I'm pretty sure I talk on behalf of you and I that we, you know, as Malaysians, oh, it's haze season lah, right? It's like we just take it, you know, we just take it since 1972, you know, like there are years that are worse than others, but that doesn't mean it's okay. And I think, Felicia, when you mean resilience, I probably would say complacency. And again, as you say, when we're talking about structural barriers to actually resolving a problem, as much as it is about governments and about businesses, it's actually us too. If we don't scream loud enough, and if we don't get active in, these sorts of conversations, and I personally think governments are as good, only their policies, their public policies are only as good as their people, what their people want, So any comment on that, SK?
I
Just
agree with
quickly.
you. Yes, and as you replace the word resilience with complacency, I think that's a good replacement. Thank you for the question. It depends on what we mean by resilience. That is true. I also think that there is a possibility that Malaysians have just accepted this to be a routine fate for us. This is not a, you're right, you're so right, Najra. This is not something that we should take lying down. I think Malaysians, Indonesians, everybody who's a concerned citizen for health in Southeast Asia should consider this to be a problem that needs a fix, once and for all fix. It will take some time, I get that, but we cannot take this lying down. We, as in everybody in Southeast Asia, I don't mean only Malaysians, I think everybody in Southeast Asia.
Yeah. Absolutely, great, thank you. I'm glad you're on the right track for that one. Thanks, Felicia. So just to finish this session, I've just got one more last question for you, SK. Thank you so much for spending your morning with us. I wanted to just open up the conversation to public health collaboration. So looking into the future, can you comment of public health collaborations on the ASEAN policy level that complement your coalition's work? And will ASEAN be haze-free by the end of this year? Million-dollar question.
That's a set of two great questions. The first one is about public health collaboration, so I'll answer that first. The second one requires me to gaze into a magic crystal ball and make a prediction. The first one's easier to answer, which is about public health collaborations at the ASEAN policy level. Short answer is not enough. Not enough in the sense that the health division in ASEAN Secretariat based in Jakarta is one of only 46 divisions. There are 46 divisions in ASEAN Secretariat. Health is one of them. And in that health department, there are less than, I don't know the actual number, but from anecdotal evidence, less than 10 to 15 staffers inside one health division versus 45 other divisions, all competing for political space. Every agenda topic is important. Trade is important. Regional integration is important. Refugees, migrants, important. Security of Southeast Asia, important. Statelessness, important. All of those are important. I do not doubt that. The point I'm making is health is one of 46. Health is understaffed and undercapitalized. And therefore, through nobody's fault, just as it is, the public health collaborations at the ASEAN policy level is limited. Does it complement the Malaysian Health Coalition's work? I would say not yet. Not yet in the sense that the Malaysian Health Coalition hasn't really explored the idea of health. We've been quite focused on the issues of COVID and health system strengthening in Malaysia. But at the appropriate time, it would be great for us to expand appropriately appropriately because we are still scientists and clinicians. We're not policy experts, or we're not economic experts, and we're not financial experts. So we're very careful about where our expertise lies. So the ASEAN policy level, again, through nobody's fault, is, shall we say, underutilized from a public health policy perspective. It hasn't yet intersected with the Malaysian Health Coalition's work. The second question is requiring me to make a prediction. Will ASEAN be haze-free by the end of this year? I unfortunately don't think so. I'm hopeful, we can all hope that we'll be free from haze by the end of this year. But the structures, both economic structures and the political structures, I guess, still nudges in the direction that haze will still be a problem for the next few years until we find a lasting solution. It is not something that you can snap your fingers and go away. But the idea is we need to be thoughtful about where the pressure points are, how to make this change, how to build alliances that we can have a durable solution. And even then, understanding that a durable solution will take time to implement. It is not snap your fingers and everything's okay. That's me making the prediction. Naja, back to you.
Thank you. I know it's not a laughing matter, and I will be livid if we have haze again this year, because I understand scientists are telling us that we might have an El Nino season again. They've done some early predictions, and that means we might have drier weather and stuff like that. But again, I can't gaze into a crystal ball as much as everyone else can. I want to then move forward and say, let's get this alliance going. Let's get the conversation going. Are there any final words for, like, if someone wants to get in touch with the Malaysia Health Coalition? I understand you have a Facebook page. If anyone is interested in your work, can get in touch with you. Is that okay?
Well, the Malaysian Health Coalition is fairly large as an entity. We do have a public presence, a website, social media pages, and so on. So if you were to Google Malaysian Health Coalition, you will be able to get a lot of links, and you can have a look at the joint statements that the coalition has put out, and also the letters to Malaysians. Actually, maybe I'll take 30 seconds to talk about this, Naja. During the COVID period, a group of about 200 volunteers in Malaysia came together to produce 10 rounds of letters to Malaysians. These have been crafted in infographics, are put on social media, in TV, newspapers, radio, on WhatsApp messages in more than 25 languages. It boggled my mind. 25 languages. We've got East Malaysian languages like Melanau and Tausug and Iban and Kadazan. We've got Orang Asli dialects, including Semai and Temuan. We've got refugee languages like Rohingya. We've got migrant languages like Bengali and Indonesian. And this will all spread out into various parts of the community, done by an entirely volunteer squad of about 200 people. It was beautiful to watch. So if you were to surf onto Malaysian Health Coalition's online presence, you'll be able to see the output from what we put together in the various languages. And this is something that I think was beautiful and at least played a small part in managing the COVID responses for Malaysia.
That is absolutely delightful. And I know it boggled my mind as well. And thank you for this great collaboration that we have together. And I'm looking forward for KAMY, which is Climate Action Malaysia, who is organizing this with us, with CERAH, Anti-Haze Action in Malaysia, and the alliance with the Malaysian Health Coalition and other NGOs. As you said, let's get together, because, you know, this is one of many. Solving problems on this level requires so many hands on ground and feet. So just to finish, I just want to say thank you, SK. Thank you, Dr. Kaur, for joining us. I would just like to close the session, and hopefully if this webinar goes gangbusters in the future, we might have you again with us. So I really, really appreciate your time. And just to finish off, I'll let our audience know that we will be posting a recorded version of this webinar on our Facebook page. So if you are watching this, then you will be on our Facebook page live stream, www.facebook.com/Anti-Haze Action. That's our page. And I'm pretty sure your page is MY Health Coalition, My Health Coalition. If we haven't been able to answer your questions today, guys, I'm so sorry, but we will collate these and attach some information here on this page. So please come back to this page and like this page and follow this page if you can, so you can get some of the updates and also our next upcoming events. Don't forget to follow us also at Instagram with our handle CERAH Asia, CERAH ASIA, CERAH Asia, for updates. We will continue the fight to keep our skies clear in 2020 and beyond, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Thank you guys. Thanks for the live stream, and thanks SK.